What does it take to land a career in AI and healthcare or use AI in your current career? This course will help you with your initial certificate and a path forward to establish a career. What can AI do? From diagnosing malignant melanoma, one of the most dangerous of all skin cancers, and diabetic retinopathy, with scores better than individual doctors, to scouring medical records for vital data, AI is bringing a new set of tools to doctors and other healthcare professionals. If you're a healthcare professional or studying to be one, you may feel locked out of this incredible technology because of its sophistication and daunting new vocabulary. In this series, you'll find just how easy it is to learn how AI works and even to embark on creating your own AI projects with little background. AI is far more accessible than you might imagine. If you're looking for a career change or enhancing your current career, AI offers a fantastic pathway. I'm Dr. Bob Arnott, and I'm your instructor for these series of courses on AI and healthcare. First, I'd like to thank my great friend and collaborator, Jack Hittery, who is a technology researcher and entrepreneur. Now, Jack collaborated with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology on a series of papers focused on deep learning. In particular, the papers address the generalization of deep learning networks. Hittery is also the author of the most recent book I've read, and that is Quantum Computing, an Applied Approach. It's a fascinating look into the future of incredibly high-speed computing across a huge variety of fields, from mass spectrometry to super sensitive GPS systems based on the Earth's magnetic fields. Thank you, Jack. You're a great co-collaborator and inspiration to us all. So in many ways, I'm just like you. I knew little about deep learning or machine learning a year ago, but knew it was important to the future of healthcare. In fact, I was advised that a bilingual physician could offer a huge amount to the practice of medicine. By bilingual, what experts means is having an expert in one field, say medicine, and in deep learning and machine learning. I took nearly 40 different courses on machine learning, deep learning, and AI, all online. I've learned Python and how to code artificial neural networks from scratch. All this seems daunting, but you really can do it on your own, at home, and on the move. I found it easiest to learn in small snippets, watching just 3 to 6 minutes of a course at a time, which is exactly what you'll find in this course. Now let me tell you a bit more about my career. After medical school and training in internal medicine, I founded the Lake Placid Sports Medicine Laboratory in Lake Placid, New York, where I trained Olympic athletes. This was also the United States Ski Team Lab. I was an Olympic physician and a U.S. ski team physician. We wrote incredibly complex computer programs for breath-by-breath gas exchange analysis and three-dimensional motion analysis. I was also the medical director for a 100-plus hospital national emergency service, some servicing emergency rooms all across the country. Then great good fortune occurred, and I was selected first to be an on-air color commentator for ABC's Wide World of Sports, and then CBS This Morning with Diane Sawyer. Later, I went on to the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather, then NBC's Dateline, Today Show, and Nightly News. I continued as a war correspondent, joining the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force for the invasion of Iraq and in Afghanistan, and through the War on Terror. I hosted a 2-season TV show called Dr. Danger, and now continue to cover urgent news stories like COVID for Fox, PBS, Al Jazeera, and Larry King, while undertaking many new projects in deep learning and broadcasting. Why so many careers? The biggest thing I tell students is that you want to master online education. This way you can reinvent yourself every 5 years with entirely new skills or even a new career. Oh, by the way, my latest online activity, learning how to write a symphony. Here's a brief snippet. By the way, AI is also learning to write music. It learns from the great masters and then produces music much like theirs. What a great new world of amazing opportunity. If you've been sidelined by COVID, now is the time to reinvent yourself. Good luck. You'll find this fun. Learning from the best. How do the very best doctors practice medicine? The primary care startup Forward follows each step top doctors take to determine why their results are so spectacular. Forward does this using voice recognition software and tracing each step on screens used to input data. The aim is for every doctor to match the performance of the top doctors, not just to achieve superior results, but to achieve a major decrease in medical errors that can result in disability and even death. ICUs produce prodigious amounts of data, too much for health professionals to dig through, especially when ICUs are filled as they have been during the height of the COVID pandemic. Tools are now being created to alert clinicians when subtle signs begin to show a course correction, such as overwhelming infection or cytokine storm, so they can react quickly and proactively. In COVID, the ability to predict respiratory failure and the need for a ventilator early is absolutely essential. The MIT Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, which is called CSAIL, created ICU Intervene to predict adverse events. The breakthrough here is that clinicians will have at their hands therapeutic options to respond quickly so that this may become a life-saving tool. The project, again, isn't taking the place of doctors and nurses, just giving them much higher quality and actionable information. As doctors, we love our independence and bristle at the suggestions others can do a better job, especially if it's a machine. That's why it's so important to view AI as a way to make us much better doctors, from getting more accurate results from scans and tests to alerting us to the best treatment options for individual patients. Here are some examples. Healthcare professionals who want to harness the power of AI to their practices. Students looking for a spectacular new career with huge opportunities working in artificial intelligence. Working in artificial intelligence is also one of the best and most promising careers worldwide. Today, with an enormous tech gap between numbers of jobs and available applicants, these are among the highest paying jobs in America. Hospitals and medical practices looking to shift into AI to improve diagnosis, treatment, and prediction. Outbreak prediction. The world is focused on how to prevent the next pandemic. AI will play a big role in its ability to consume staggering amounts of data from so many different sources to make that prediction. Now, let's look at some of the sources used. Satellite data, social media, crowd swarming, cell phone tracking, cell phone locations, mining social media, ProMedMail, an internet-based reporting platform which monitors evolving diseases and emerging ones and provides outbreak reports in real time. Overview. Now let's take an overview of the areas that AI is bringing to medicine. Drug development, disease diagnosis, analysis of health plans. This is one we could all use help with. They're far too complicated for me to figure out. Health monitoring. With the advent of wearables, we produce huge amounts of data exhaust from workouts and sleeping to stages of illness. Staggering amounts of data are collected. Only AI can make long-term sense of them. The Whoop device is a great example. I wear one every single day. It's right here, in fact. And it tells me how long I should work and even how much sleep I should get. Tracking on iPhone use of social media sites. Even proximity to others in learning to distance during pandemics, and part of monitoring digital consultation, surgical treatment, and including fantastic new robotic surgery. Analyzing medical data. I think this is the biggest of all of them because of the staggering amount of data created every single day in healthcare. Personalized treatment. Right down to the DNA in our genes, medicine will be personalized for the fewest possible side effects and the best possible outcomes. Medical treatment, from preventing medication errors to prescribing the most effective drugs for you. Smartwatch. I have one I use to track my workouts, and another, this Whoop device, that tracks my workout recovery. However, these devices have crossed the threshold from workouts to serious medical devices capable of detecting disease. Now, you may have heard of atrial fibrillation. This is one of the most common conditions in all of cardiology and the number one most serious cause of irregular heartbeats. The specific heart rate type is called irregularly irregular. As you can see in this trace, the pulse looks completely erratic. This is especially important to detect early because one of the heart's booster pumps, the atrium, beats far less vigorously during atrial fibrillation. AF is the shorthand for atrial fibrillation, and this slowing down of the atria allows blood clots to form. These may cause a debilitating or fatal stroke. In fact, AF is one of the leading causes of stroke, so detecting it is incredibly important. However, many people have no symptoms or not very significant ones that would bring them to the attention of a doctor. When they do have symptoms, doctors will give them a monitor to wear for several days, but this could miss an episode of atrial fibrillation if it occurs less frequently. So what's the solution? Smartwatches that can record EKGs. This study used an Apple Watch with a Cardia band and compared it to a highly accurate insertable cardiac monitor to validate it. Researchers used a convolutional neural network. This is the complex multi-stage series of neural networks used to study images in radiology. The CNN was trained how to recognize the rhythm using 7,500 alive core users. A complex and expensive implantable device detected 82 episodes, while the AFSW smartwatch found 80 episodes. The authors concluded that AFSW, and that stands for Atrial Fibrillation Smartwatch, was highly sensitive for detecting AF. The advantage is this approach is very inexpensive and allows long-term surveillance of the condition, so important to asymptomatic or minimally symptomatic patients who may be found just in time, rather than having a short window with traditional monitoring where they may be missed. This technology promises to find many more cases. One of the biggest frustrations in medicine is the amount of data locked up in electronic medical records. Because so much of this data is not organized but remains in free-flowing text, it has remained outside of the hands of data analysts and researchers since it doesn't appear in the neat kinds of rows and columns found on a spreadsheet, which lends itself to immediate analysis after the data is cleaned up and prepared. So now scientists are using another kind of AI called natural language processing. And what they do with this is they dig through text files for data. This form of prospecting is uncovering a goldmine of incredibly useful data and lending tremendous insights into clinical practice. Here's an example. Google took 46 billion data points from more than 216,000 electronic medical records. Once the data was mined from the health records, they were far better able to find the causes of unexpected hospital readmissions. This is one of the highest cost centers for hospitals and an event they try best to avoid. Hospital administrators could also better forecast how long patients would stay in the hospital and who was most likely to die. An astonishing number of Americans have diabetes or prediabetes and don't even know it. Now, here's an illness that leads to heart attack, stroke, and a variety of medical ills. But how best to predict who is likely to suffer from diabetes so they can be targeted for early intervention to prevent heart disease, stroke, nerve damage, and even blindness? Now, one way to make the prediction is through the patient's own medical records. But here's the trouble. These records are often so poorly formatted. They just have free text which cannot be used in a traditional database used to analyze health. To harness that data in the medical record for the prediction of diabetes, researchers took 9,948 patients, with 1,904 of them already diagnosed with type 2 diabetes using a novel machine learning algorithm. Researchers were able to further optimize the prediction of when diabetes would begin, making the test more sensitive. As we'll learn in the deep learning chapter, the key is what we call a stochastic gradient, predicting diabetes mellitus. As a medical student, I saw the ravages of diabetes firsthand as a summer intern at the world famous Joslin Diabetes Center. Years later, I was privileged to become an incorporator at Joslin and followed all the wonderful research that Joslin and Harvard undertook. Now, diabetes is becoming the most common chronic disease worldwide. Most of us know it as a disorder of our blood sugar levels, but there's much more to it than that. Diabetes causes tremendous damage to our hearts, eyes, small blood vessels, nerves, and other organs in our body. So, the ability to predict who will become diabetic and what their progress is very important to them, their doctor, and the whole healthcare system. So, here's the $1 million question for you to think about, and that is, what if you could predict early who will become diabetic? Could doctors limit the number of heart attacks and strokes, blindness, and excruciatingly painful nerve damage? And about 30% of diabetics have this nerve damage. These authors developed a data mining strategy, and it was a prediction model. As you'll find as you get into your own deep learning models, the data pre-processing is an incredibly important first step. These authors use data pre-processing techniques to handle missing values and dimensionally reduction models to improve data quality. They determined that early prediction of the disease could be improved and found measurement of blood glucose and blood pressure extremely useful. In type 1 diabetes, the patient makes little or no insulin of their own. Without insulin, blood sugar can rise to dangerously high levels and even cause coma. So for nearly 100 years, diabetics have used insulin to help glucose enter into their cells, where it's then used as a fuel, and to decrease blood sugar levels to normal. However, the way insulin is given is in advance of eating, so it becomes very important for a patient to be able to predict in advance how much insulin to give themselves. Why? Insulin works over a longer period of time. So you have to kind of guess in advance if you're going to exercise or eat what your insulin levels should be to match the glucose that you've taken in as food or expended as exercise. So what these authors did was develop a system for forecasting blood sugar levels. As an artificial pancreas is developed, that is an internal organ that could actually sense and give you the right amount of insulin, this insulin recommender forecasting ability will be incredibly important. They developed a model for glucose insulin dynamics. Now, they included that their proposed glucose forecasting algorithm looked well suited for the long-term glucose predictions necessary for good blood glucose control. Controlling blood sugar is vital to both preventing episodes of low blood sugar and to the overall average blood sugar levels and bringing those down to normal levels. Asthma. So why has AI come to healthcare? Quite simply, medicine creates staggering amounts of data every single day, simply far too much for anyone to look at or analyze. This inability to take advantage of this data hampers decision making and even leads to tragic errors in diagnosis and treatment. The advent of deep learning in medicine makes it possible to look at this data quickly and effectively to make tremendous improvements in the care of patients by establishing patterns that simply were not possible before deep learning. Now, with standard computing and supercomputer calculations, this could take years. In fact, some people say it could take centuries. However, the ability of the artificial neural network to analyze data makes these calculations far faster and their usage much more practical. In this course, we're going to survey some of the most spectacular achievements. Now, at the outset, I'd like to say that you want to look at AI as an assistant who will help you harness the power of the data to improve your practice or job. Too many of us are just afraid of it. It's not the AI of the movies where machines will become doctors. AI just helps us become better doctors, nurses, paramedics, respiratory therapists, and healthcare administrators, so we can focus much more of our time caring for patients rather than being crushed by a truly overwhelming amount of data. So take the COVID crisis, we call the SARS-CoV-2 crisis, with whole hospitals filled with ICU beds, creating staggering amounts of data. AI allows doctors to shift to find the most important trends, like the beginning of what we call a cytokine storm, or respiratory failure, or cardiogenic shock, to take swift intervention. It kills me as a doctor to see how many young people have died, I think, unnecessarily. Even in an individual medical practice, medicine overwhelms practitioners with data. The worry is that doctors and nurses might miss something incredibly important to your health. AI assists doctors by letting them know when trouble lurks. Now, this could be a warning that a heart failure patient is worsening and may be headed back into the hospital, is just one example, and a very important one because this costs hospitals hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Another great example is asthma. This is a disease you can hear I have suffered from for many decades. Now, each day there are subtle, small changes in patient vital measurements, signs the doctor can't possibly keep track of because they're not there day to day. So let's have a look at the beginning of trouble. The patient's ability to quickly expel air is reduced. It's called FEV1. You go into a little device and it will tell you how quickly you can expel air. There may be a slight rise in temperature. Then the use of the rescue inhaler to counter signs of wheezing slowly increases. You can see how many inhalations they take. Then the amount of oxygen in the blood drops to 90% or less. That's a critical juncture. Pretty soon, the patient is in real trouble and headed to an emergency room or even an ICU. Now, could this be prevented? You bet it could. The patients could have begun a rescue plan days earlier, but no one picked up on the trend. Now, each year asthma costs $52 billion, myriad ICU visits, and many highly avoidable fatalities. Yet over 50% of adults and 70% of children don't take the basic medicines necessary to get better and feel good. The solution is wearables. You can see like these little devices that I have here all the time. I usually get like 3 or 4 of them. Or portable equipment that allows daily or even minute-by-minute measurements to be taken. But since doctors don't have the time to look at these measurements, you need someone who can. And that's where AI comes to the rescue, looking for important trends and alerting the doctor. This is a project I'm currently working on. We hope to be able to alert doctors and patients when they're getting into trouble to take early and decisive action. In this survey, let's look at some of the most important and interesting applications. We'll also introduce some basic kinds of deep neural networks used for various tasks. Now, you needn't know much about them, but I hope it will pique your interest in the next sections of the course. In other courses, we'll teach you the basic tools of machine and deep learning. This course isn't going to get into much technical detail. We'll just look at the wonder of deep and machine learning and how it can change your career and change your life. Asthma. Asthma is one of the top 10 diseases in the United States. 1 in 13 people have asthma. Yet 11 million people, including 3 million children, have one or more attack during a given year, say the year 2017, when 3,564 patients died from asthma. And I think almost every single one of those deaths is unnecessary. The economic cost, billions of dollars, and staggering amounts of time lost from work. Now there's a deep learning solution that helps diagnose adult asthma. The researchers looked at the records of 566 patients with respiratory complaints. Now, specialists recorded symptoms, physical signs, and objective measurements. They then compared several methods of diagnosing asthma. These are covered in the machine learning section of the course and are called, these are the names, support vector machine, logistic regression, and deep neural networks. This is very important to be able to show that deep learning has these solutions to be able to improve over a standard statistical method. The researchers did conclude that deep learning was better able to diagnose adult asthma when compared to standard machine learning. The deep learning model scored an astonishing 98% accuracy compared with 82% for support vector machines and 94% for logistic analysis, making an incredibly powerful tool for the diagnosis of asthma. Brain aneurysms. There are few emergencies in medicine more terrifying to a patient than when a weakness in a blood vessel in the brain bursts open and blood literally squirts at incredibly high pressure into brain tissue. Now, this can be immediately devastating, causing a terrible stroke. In fact, many patients die before they ever get to the emergency room. Patients describe this as the worst headache they ever had. Now, once a patient does arrive in the emergency room, it's incredibly important to determine what's going on. For instance, if it's a blood clot, then doctors would take immediate action to dissolve it or remove it. But if it's an aneurysm, they wouldn't want to consider that because you already have bleeding and these techniques would cause more bleeding. So you have to consider either neurosurgery or placing a coil into the aneurysm, it's like a balloon, to prevent it from bleeding again. However, in the middle of the night, it may be difficult to get an accurate reading, even more so in rural and isolated areas and hospitals without neuroradiologists on call. What's interesting is how scientists publishing in the journal Radiology set this up. Here's what they did. They extracted images from 4 healthcare facilities over an 11-year period. These had already been read by radiologists and included aneurysms. They then divided the images that they had collected into 3 data sets. A training set, as we're going to learn in the deep and machine learning course, internal test data, and external test data. Once the tests were completed, the study authors concluded that their new algorithm improved detecting an aneurysm tremendously, more than by standard techniques. The final learning algorithm detected cerebral aneurysms with high sensitivity, improved the detection over the initial reports. This is a huge win for patients. These computers can complete the analysis in seconds to minutes so that doctors can immediately begin to plan their therapeutic options instead of waiting for hours for a radiologist to be woken up or the images to be read someplace else, maybe a half a continent away. As we said, time is brain. The faster you intervene in some conditions, the more brain you have. Ischemic strokes are the most common kind and can lead to long-term disability requiring months to years of rehabilitation. Families, patients, and healthcare providers all need to figure out what the long-term consequences are likely to be. So for proved accuracy, these authors turn to a machine learning technique. As we have seen, proving the accuracy of a new technique is vital, and so these authors compared 3 separate methods. And we're going to learn all about these in the following courses: a deep neural network, random forest, and logistic regression. They used the Rankin scale to score results 0, 1, and 3 months and respectively analyzed 2,604 patients. Which method scored most favorably? The deep neural network model was significantly better than random forest or logistic regression. These authors took this as reassurance that the deep neural network can improve the accuracy of predicting long-term outcomes in ischemic stroke patients. Cardiac arrest. Few events in medicine are as dramatic or urgent as a sudden cardiac arrest outside of the hospital. Once the patient's heart stops, there are just a few precious minutes until irreversible brain damage begins. I recall going through some rapids on the Nantahala River and seeing a woman face down in the water. I picked her up out of the water. She was blue and had no heartbeat and wasn't breathing at all. So as we continued down out of the rapids and to the side of the river, 2 of us began CPR. And within minutes, she came back to life. It was astonishing. However, in many cases, patients require prolonged CPR and the use of a defibrillator to get them back to life. After the seconds or minutes without an effective heartbeat and the trauma that may occur, the question is what kind of neurological damage would the patient suffer and would they survive till discharge? The future is so uncertain that for a brief time at the heart of the COVID crisis, New York City ambulance crews stopped doing CPR if there was no heartbeat when they arrived on the scene. The public outrage was so great they quickly discarded the policy. Now, an article in the journal Resuscitation describes a prognostic system based on deep learning to predict neurological recovery and survival to discharge. Researchers studied 36,190 patients and divided them into a set of 28,045 subjects for the derivation of data and 8,145 subjects for validation data. That's to test to make sure it worked. The endpoints were neurological recovery and survival to discharge. They rated the chance of recovery from 0 to 100. As you find when you take the machine learning and deep learning courses, you always want to compare your deep learning results to standard statistical and machine learning methods to demonstrate your success. These authors had an incredibly impressive 95%. They compared the results to logistic regression, random forest, support vector machines, and conventional methods. Deep learning significantly outperformed these other methods. Remember that the more data you have, the better deep learning performs, and for a data set of over 36,000 patients, deep learning proved to be a perfect solution. Hip fractures are a leading cause of death and disability among older adults. The fracture itself doesn't usually kill them, but the decreased mobility and long convalescence does. Despite their enormous clinical importance, radiologists and doctors misdiagnosing hip fractures more commonly than any other fracture on x rays of the pelvis. So you can imagine how painful a delay like this is and how it could lead to a far worse outcome. This journal in NPJ, Digital Medicine, used computer aided diagnosis. This is incredibly important to be able to do this. They actually had they called it computer aided diagnosis to try and improve the number of fractures detected. Their biggest problem? The features of the image on x ray, which form the basis of computer analysis, are very hard to understand, which is why radiologists often miss the diagnosis. These researchers trained deep learning models on 17,587 radiographs. Imagine how long would it take to train an individual radiologist on so many x-rays. It might be a whole career. Yet deep learning system was able to do this with amazing speed. So great students these computers were. These researchers found that by combing image features, patient data, and hospital process features, they could reach the highest accuracy in diagnosis, an AUC of 91%. As you'll see in this course, the ability to bring other forms of data into the equation improves the accuracy of prediction. Research still defining this one to see how best to integrate with the clinician. Preterm birth. Preterm birth poses enormous risk to the newborn. Many touch and go weeks in a neonatal ICU and tremendous financial and emotional costs. If doctors could better predict preterm birth, they'd have the opportunity of better managing the last weeks of pregnancy and perhaps giving mothers a better chance of carrying their child to term. So, extreme preterm poses the greatest risk of death. This is before 28 weeks and accounts for the majority of deaths. In this study, authors looked at the electronic medical record. Again, this can be a pretty poor source of organized data, and so deep learning solutions are ideal for extracting higher quality data out of the electronic medical record. These researchers used a recurrent neural network. Now, this is the first time we're seeing this in our course, and the RNN, recurrent neural network, allows you to look at multiple data inputs over time to get a longitudinal view of the data. Incredibly important for so much of what happens in medicine. So the RNN evaluated 10 years of EHR data in 25,689 deliveries at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. As you'll learn in your deep learning model, you need to compare this to a traditional machine learning to be able to prove its superiority. In this case, logistic regression, support vector, and gradient boosted train on the data set and were compared to an RNN. We'll look at all of these methods in the machine learning and medicine course. You can always skip ahead at any time to learn about RNNs, CNNs, artificial neural networks if you'd like to. The fantastic result of this work was the ability to predict preterm birth up to 8 weeks earlier, so doctors had more time to plan and add extra resources to the care of the mother and her baby. They also isolated several important risks. So let's take a look at those risks. Those did then include twin pregnancy, short cervical length, high blood pressure, systemic lupus erythematosus, and hydroxychloroquine sulfate usage. Depression. Mental health experts say that depression touches every family in America. But how common is it? As the leading cause of disability in the world, risk factors should also be identified. The answer should come from large data surveys and should work across cultures, from North America, South America, all across Africa and Asia. These authors wrote in the Journal of Affective Disorders that they designed a customized and deep neural network and machine learning classifiers to assess 19,725 participants from the NHANES database from 1999 through 2014, 4,949 from the South Korean NHANES, what's called the KNHANES database, in 2014. NHANES is the largest nutritional survey in the US. So, how good was it? The system accurately predicted 91% of depression in the NHANES National Survey. The advantage of deep learning was the ability to predict depression across cultural divides. They hope to do further research to delineate risk factors for depression and other mental illness. As a medical resident, I dreaded the call over the loudspeaker. AMBU 9, AMBU 9. This meant a patient suffered a cardiac arrest on the 9th floor. We rushed to try to save the patient's life using every available measure. Afterward, we would look at each other and say, gee, He looked fine an hour ago. What happened? The trouble is you just can't tell by looking at a patient. So these authors published in Critical Care Medicine looking at using AI to predict a cardiac arrest in the hospital long before it happens. The study population included 8,039 adult patients, which yielded 83 cases of deterioration, which was either admission to an ICU or cardiac arrest. They used a deep learning system which accurately found patient deterioration and outperformed all the available conventional methods in terms of this prediction. Pretty astounding when you think about it. Best of all, this saves lives by selecting which patients needed the very most attention. They also decreased the alarm count by an astonishing 59% a day. Wish I had one of those when I was an intern and resident. Would have meant a ton more sleep. Module 3, Cancer and Cancer Treatment. Malignant melanoma is the most serious of all skin cancers and can be fatal. I can't tell you the number of patients I've had where someone missed the diagnosis entirely or they ended up at a later stage when it wasn't curable. If the melanoma was less than 2 millimeters thick, there's a very good chance of long-term survival. That's why it's so important to find these early. But where do you get the expertise, especially in rural areas and different parts of the world? So this paper in the European Journal of Cancer laid out a contest putting dermatologists head-to-head against what's called a convolutional neural network. The CNN was trained on 12,378 open source dermatologic images. They chose 157 dermatologists across 12 universities in Germany. So how did they do? Well, let's take a look. The chief physician showed the highest mean specificity of 69.2%. They had a mean sensitivity of 73. With the same high specificity of 69.2%, the CNN had a mean sensitivity of 84.5%. This is great news for patients around the world, since their images would have immediate results that outscore the very best dermatologists. Remember, the importance of training is that the CNN learn to recognize what a melanoma is and what it is not. It is this training phase which makes the readings possible. And as you'll find, the convolutional network neural network is one of the most exciting parts of all of deep learning. When cancer spreads throughout the body, the ability to detect those tumors and understand their distribution in the body is the key to tumor-targeting therapeutic antibodies. These researchers wanted to know where these tumor cells were located and developed a system called Deep MACT in mice. That's Deep M-A-C-T in mice. They imaged the cancer by applying a fluorescent signal of cancer cells and magnifying it 100-fold. They developed a deep learning algorithm to automate the calculation of these tumors throughout the body for 5 cancers, including breast, lung, and pancreas. Now, here's what the system allowed them to do. Researchers could determine the size, shape, spatial distribution, and the degree to which metastasis could be targeted using a therapeutic monoclonal antibody. And these monoclonal antibodies are like heat-seeking missiles for cancer, so it's simply a fantastic advance in medicine. They concluded that the Deep MAC could considerably improve the discovery of effective antibody-based therapeutics at the preclinical stage. So this is great in terms of cancer research and perhaps cures sometime in the future. Breast cancer. Screening for breast cancer remains vexing for doctors and patients. Concerns are falsely positive or falsely negative scans, generating invasive procedures when none is needed, or missing a cancer at its earliest stages when it might be curable. So in this study, the authors evaluated the accuracy and efficiency of combining machine and deep learning for early breast cancer. The analysis looked at both digital mammography images and electronic health records. They took 52,936 images. These are collected from 13,234 women who underwent at least one mammogram. As we've seen, the training model is the key to success, so these researchers trained on 9,611 mammograms. Their goal? Predict if the biopsy would be malignant and tell the difference between normal and abnormal screening examinations. Incredibly important. Again, this will be a false positive or a false negative is the way we would say it in medicine, telling you you have a disease when you don't or don't when you do. In the test set, 48% of false negative findings on mammograms were found. This could allow for these women to receive further diagnostic testing and treatment. These false negative results are the most vexing problem in breast cancer detection, and this combined method of using machine and deep learning together solved a big part of the problem by finding these missed diagnoses. One big problem that doctors have in detecting early breast cancer is breast tissue density. With high tissue density, tumors may be hidden and give a woman a falsely negative report when she actually has breast cancer. This can be a terrible tragedy because breast cancers are found at so much later a stage when the chance of successful outcome can be far less. High tissue density may mask early cancers. Breast tissue may be classified as entirely fat, scattered areas of fibroglandular density, heterogeneously dense, and extremely dense, which the system had to learn to read from training data. So, this training data set was enormous and consisted of approximately 2,500 patients with 10,239 multi-view images and image resolution between 42 and 50 microns. So it's a tremendous amount of data. It would be hard to handle if you weren't using artificial intelligence. To solve the problem, these researchers used advanced machine learning techniques to score breast cancer density. As we have seen, the CNN is used for evaluating images, and this is what these researchers use. The CNN was particularly valuable here in evaluating the three-dimensional layers of the scan and extracting deep features of the potential cancers. What I love best about deep learning solutions that these authors were able to point out is the ability to democratize healthcare. That is, you would expect phenomenal results at a top teaching hospital like Mass General or New York Presbyterian, but having AI allows a woman with a high breast density the same access to this expert, precise analysis of her mammogram in a small rural hospital or remote African village, even if the local radiologists lack the radiologic reading capabilities. The conclusion was this AI-based system did aid in the clinical diagnosis. Personalized radiation therapy. The dose of radiation used has always had specific fields or areas that are targeted, but the customization stopped there. Now the Cleveland Clinic combines data from imaging studies with information gathered and examined from the electronic medical record of the patient themselves. This allows doctors to combine imaging data with risk factors the patients may have. This strategy minimizes side effects and can reduce the chance of failure to treat the tumor to less than 5%. So let's take a look at the study. The Lancet Digital Health Journal came out and reported on 944 lung cancer patients scheduled for high-dose radiation. Each CT scan was analyzed to create an image signature. Then the patient's risk factors were added to tailor therapy for the individual patient. As we'll see in other examples, it's this combination of imaging with patient data that improves therapy. Less toxic cancer treatment. Cancer treatment poisons and kills cancer cells, but at the same time may damage normal cells, causing toxic side effects that cause serious symptoms from nausea to hair loss. MIT used a machine learning approach on a brain tumor called a glioblastoma, one of the most serious, lethal, and feared. Doctors want to shrink the tumor to the smallest size they can using a combination of radiation therapy and pharmaceuticals. Where does machine learning come in here? The MIT researchers used a self-learning technique where machine learning could iterate through all the possible combinations of drugs and treatments to find the lowest possible dose that still achieved a decrease in tumor size. The gold standard was reducing the size of the tumor to the same degree that the traditional approach does, but with far, far fewer side effects. Simulations showed that the potency was decreased by as much as 75% to dramatically decrease side effects while still shrinking the tumor to the maximum possible extent. Module 4, Medical Imaging and Diagnostics. Neuroimaging. Deep learning allows for a much faster diagnosis and accuracy, as good as the very best radiologists in the world at reading images from x-rays to MRIs. We'll look at several applications later in this course, such as diagnosing a cerebral aneurysm. There are two key techniques in deep learning applied here. The first is that of a convolutional neural network. Now, this is a great illustration of how one works, showing the CT scan on the left. Now look at the pooling layer. You can see the images are broken down into many basic shapes such as curves. At the other side of the deep neural network is the output layer. In this case, the neural image was able to output whether the patient had lost blood flow to an area long enough to destroy brain tissue. This is called infarction. Also tell there's a tumor or bleeding. Why is this important? When a suspected stroke comes into the emergency room, the doctor must know if there's something they can do, and they must know this right away. Otherwise, they lose a key window of treatment. As they say, time is brain. One key distinction is this: did a bleed cause a stroke? If so, then using clot busting drugs or an invasive technique could make the situation far, far worse. But if there were a blood clot, then doctors could move quickly to consider clot busting drugs, which just break up the clot, or a procedure to remove the clot. If these are successful and they are performed early enough, much of the neurologic damage of a stroke may be prevented in the best of all circumstances. Analyzing images. The biggest successes in AI in medicine come from the analysis of medical images. Here are the kinds of images that CNNs can analyze: MRIs, retinal scans of the eye, skin irregularities, CT scans, PET scans, chest x-rays. In fact, did you know that there are 2 billion chest x-rays taken every year? Imagine if you could learn something by studying hundreds of thousands of them that could be applied to making a diagnosis on your chest x-ray. Well, that's the brilliance of AI. Deep learning systems can learn from these millions or billions of images to make a far better diagnosis. Accuracy. These analyses can match the very best clinicians in the world for accuracy and sometimes surpass them. Take as an example the ability to diagnose a malignant melanoma, the most lethal of skin cancers, and often linked to sun exposure. A 2018 study demonstrated an AI score accuracy 10% greater than humans. This level of assistance to a dermatologist in practice is phenomenal, increasing accuracy beyond what most doctors could ever hope for. This technology can make an expert out of the most junior or inexperienced doctor with its ability to accurately diagnose this cancer and get a patient to therapy as quickly as possible. Speed. Doctors are used to carefully poring over images for hours to be certain of their diagnosis. With time-critical neurological emergencies, AI can prove to be a godsend, making the diagnosis of strokes or brain bleeds up to 150 times faster than a doctor could. So for remote hospitals in rural areas like the one I live in, this technology provides a great early read so the right therapy or transfer to a bigger center can be made. I love the expression used in ERs, and I've used it a couple times already, but it is time is brain. Simply put, that means the faster you can act, the more brain you can save with aggressive therapies, from clot-busting drugs to invasive new techniques or open neurosurgical procedures. Time is incredibly precious in these circumstances, and AI can make the life-saving difference. Method. The specific kind of AI used to analyze images is called a convolutional neural network. The many different layers you see represent the levels of analysis of a scan, and it works incredibly well at analyzing medical images. CNNs use a series of filters to learn what objects are composed of. Now that begins with the most basic stuff like curves, edges, flat lines, and it progresses to smaller details of an object and finally to the entire picture. Now let's look at another example of analyzing images. These are some of the richest sources of data in all of medicine. The key is that each pixel can be represented digitally and entered into a CNN for analysis. So let's look at eyes. Google's DeepMind is developing a CDS tool to identify more than 50 eye diseases and recommend therapy. A study published in Nature, which is one of the most prestigious journals of all, found this was as accurate as a human ophthalmologist. The key is that a tremendous amount of time is saved examining the scans. Currently, doctors have to look at incredibly detailed 3D scans of the back of the eye, which can take tremendous amounts of time and are difficult to read and interpret. This was pioneered at Moorfields, which has to read more than 1,000 scans a day. With a CDS tool, patients are quickly triaged to the appropriate treatment. There are huge advantages to centers without Moorfield's expertise, which can now benefit from the same highly accurate readings. Imagine you live in a small town without a major ophthalmology hospital. This kind of scan analysis allows you to have the same level of expertise in diagnosing your eye complaints as a major center, making medicine so much more accessible. This is the true democratization of medicine. Virtual biopsy. The next generation scientists are working on examining a sample of tissue in question, avoiding a biopsy or even an operation. These virtual biopsies use image based algorithms to identify key properties of the tumors, the phenotypes and genetic properties of the tumors. Now, let's get into some depth for the most interesting range of applications, beginning with operative decisions. Do you operate or not? Surgeons often have to make a decision when they are operating based on pathological readings on a slice of tissue taken out. Is it cancerous? What cancer is it? Has it spread? What's the stage? So here's a paper in Medical Hypotheses. The authors conclude that these frozen sections of tissue taken during the operation are incredibly important for decision making, but that the reading can be very time consuming and is often highly inaccurate. Imagine keeping a patient under anesthesia for an extra 40 minutes. Then imagine making the wrong decision based on a faulty reading. Although this method is just in its infancy, with large training sets, the authors expect real-time diagnosis, ease of use, and high accuracy. Discovering new drugs. Traditional means of drug discovery are proving harder and harder to find new life-saving drugs. So pharma and universities have turned to AI. Here's why. This is an arena with truly staggering amounts of data that would take months to pore over using conventional means. What AI does is to take genomic data, clinical records, data from entire populations, but sifting through this quickly and effectively for new drug candidates can be incredibly difficult. Now, this can be brought through to a successful clinical trial using AI. Prescription errors. Giving patients the wrong drug or the wrong dosage costs billions of dollars every year and kills or injures thousands of patients. Imagine giving an anticoagulant drug to a patient who already has a severe bleeding problem. I did a story on this when I was at CBS News about a mail-order pharmacy that sent a patient a potentially lethal blood thinner by accident. A study in Joint Commission Journal reported that a machine learning system generated 10,668 alerts. 68.2% would not have been detected by the traditional system. The system reached an accuracy of 92%. 79.7% of the alerts were clinically valid, so that addressing them in a timely fashion would have prevented side effects. This is an area of huge national concern, and deep learning is proving to be an incredibly valuable tool in alerting doctors of errors. Drug target interactions. Background. I visited Pfizer's R&D facility a few years ago in Groton, Connecticut. This incredible facility was spending upwards of $7 billion a year on drug discovery, part of why new drugs are so incredibly expensive. To find new ways for drug repurposing, this research paper took an approach to predict how a drug would interact with its target in the body. For instance, many drugs work on a specific target, almost like a lock and key. The staggering amount of high-dimensional data made traditional approaches like logistic regression inefficient. So, they employed a deep neural network for repurposing drugs for breast cancer treatment. The complex model succeeded. The plan is to marry the massive large-scale genomic studies with the potential drug targets to determine which drugs can be repurposed. Genomic data are the largest data sets of all, so the ability to use advanced deep learning techniques to match drug targets with this genomic data is one of the most ambitious and potentially useful applications in all of medicine today. It'll be very fun to watch. Module 6, Nutrition, Food, Weight Loss, and Wellness. As a physician who has written 15 books, many about nutrition, one of the toughest problems has been determining what somebody really ate. We know what they said they ate, but what did they really eat? There have been all kinds of calorie counters and logging systems for food, but none very satisfactory. The reason doctors want to know is that there could be some really terrible food choices that patients make, upping their daily calories tremendously. For instance, our family loves cinnamon buns for breakfast, but each is around 350 calories. So if everyone had 3, that's a ton of calories. So here's where deep learning may play an incredibly useful role. An automatic food image recognition system for dietary assessments is published in the journal Nutrients. However, it's not as simple as it seems. The idealized pictures of a hamburger in a fast food restaurant looks very different from the messed up ones I grill here at home. So the previous attempts have shown very poor accuracy. The answer is a newly defined deep convolutional neural network architecture called Nutrinet. They tuned the CNN with a recognition dataset containing 225,953 images of 520 different food and drink items. Why so many images? Again, because of the vastly different appearances food may have. Training a neural network so many images ensures that it can identify a food in the many different sizes, shapes, colors, and textures it may have. The authors tested Nutrinet on the University of Milano Bicocco 2016 food image dataset, that's a mouthful, on which they improved upon the provided database recognition results. The model continues to learn and improve with new images of food and drink. Think again of a hamburger and how different it would look if grilled outside on a barbecue, indoors in a microwave, or in a fast food restaurant. This is the kind of application that makes deep learning shine because it can learn quickly from such vastly different series of images. Well, how did it do? Up to a 94.7% accuracy. This model is now being used as part of a mobile app for the dietary assessment of Parkinson's disease patients. So the big question may be, gee, that looks terrific, but how on earth would I ever figure out how to do that? Easy. A terrific site called GitHub. Have a look through here at the actual instructions the authors used. GitHub has complete applications and all the code to go along with it. So you can actually take that code and put it in your own program. Since chances are that you can find an off-the-shelf application to whatever project you're undertaking, you want to have a very basic understanding of the main AI programming language, Python. We'll have a look at that in the machine learning course. Microbiome. The human microbiome plays a number of critical roles impacting almost every aspect of human health and well-being. Conditions in the microbiome have been linked to a number of significant diseases. Additionally, revolutions in sequencing technology have led to a rapid increase in publicly available sequencing data. Consequently, there have been growing efforts to predict disease status from metagenomic sequencing data, with a proliferation of new approaches in the last few years. Some of these efforts have explored utilizing a powerful form of machine learning called deep learning, which has been applied successfully to several biological domains. Here we review some of these methods and the algorithms that they are based on, with a particular emphasis on deep learning methods. We also perform a deeper analysis of type 2 diabetes and obesity datasets that have eluded improved results, using a variety of machine learning and feature extraction methods. We conclude by offering perspectives on study design considerations that may impact results and future directions the field can take to improve results and offer more valuable conclusions. The scripts and extracted features for the analysis conducted in this paper are available via GitHub. Okay, now let's take a look at metabolic modeling. Okay, so we're leaving the most complex for last. The dream for many of us in medicine is the ability to see the entire production cycle of the human body, beginning with genetic information and ending with a specific product the body makes to run its daily activities. This is the most staggering amount of data that can be imagined, even for a single human being, and encompasses several biological domains. Let's look at each of these fields from beginning to end. DNA sequencing allows doctors to look at every single gene in your body, including those which may predispose you to illness. This is termed genomics. But this alone doesn't tell the whole story, because you don't know how active each of these genes are, how they might interact with other genes, and what they control or manufacture in the body. Next is RNA sequencing, or what we call transcriptomics, basically taking the instructions from the DNA and bringing it out to the rest of the body. mRNAs are the messengers that carry instructions from the genome to specific organs in the body to make new proteins and operate cellular machinery. So knowing how much RNA is produced gives you a sense of how active the DNA is. A team at Stanford is now tracking the actual mRNA using the production of serotonin. Then there's epigenetics, or the effect of the environment on how we feel and how healthy we may be. Diet and exercise, for instance, may affect whether these genes are turned on or off, through a process called DNA methylation. Finally, there's the end game. What are the proteins and metabolites that the body produces to make our body function and rebuild itself after every day? This is a fascinating new name, multi-omics. We've seen genomics, transcriptomics, proteomics, and metabolomics. Throw them all together and you have multi-omics. This is the big game. Imagine being able to follow a metabolic pathway from the gene through the messenger to the actual protein which carries out the body's mission. This is staggeringly complex, but perfect for machine learning since it can determine the associations between different parts of a multi-omic pathway. You'll see every kind of standard and machine learning technique from ANNs and random forest to support vector machines and bagging SVMs employed in these analyses. More detail on these in the courses on machine learning and deep learning. I spent some time in metabolomics looking at the effect of healthy part of coffee called a chlorogenic acid. What is the ultimate effect on inflammation in the bloodstream? These new techniques will allow us to sort through all the metabolites to find what their effect is on inflammation in the bloodstream and to determine what are the most beneficial and which gain their greatest boost from coffee. Body fat. From the time we were medical professionals, professors taught us that we had different kinds of fat. The most dangerous was called abdominal fat because it was associated with worse metabolic risks, such as high cholesterol, heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. But how much do we really have? Some gyms use body fat calipers or body impedance devices, but the only accurate way is with magnetic resonance imaging or MRIs, which determines both the total body volume of fat and whether it's distributed around the abdomen or in the arms and legs, where it might be a little bit healthier. MRIs take many different slices of our abdomen, and analyzing each individual picture can be incredibly tedious and time-consuming. Plus, a study would be limited to very few people given the onerous labor costs involved. So researchers reported in PLOS ONE, the online journal, a method using deep learning. They segmented the different kinds of fat, abdominal and subcutaneous, such as that found on your leg. The architecture they used was found on UNet, a publicly available open source ANT-ARNet library. This is a growing repository of well-known neural networks and is worth exploring for solutions that may already fit your problem. They then compared the results to manual measurement and found a high correlation, demonstrating the accuracy of the deep learning model. Weight loss surgery. Weight loss surgery has increased tremendously in popularity recently. Why? Many of the health consequences and risks of obesity are reduced from diabetes to coronary artery disease with weight loss surgery. Blood sugar levels decline, cholesterol levels come down, so more and more doctors are recommending weight loss surgery for health rather than cosmetic reasons. The limits for surgery have also decreased. How good are these outcomes, though? Researchers publishing in the Journal of Clinical Medicine decided to look at 5-year results to determine if they could predict how well a patient might do with surgery using a CNN. One key aspect we will learn about is tuning these deep learning models to get the best possible result. These researchers found that the more layers, computational units, epochs, and small batch sizes they used, the better their result was. So how do they do? The CNN outperformed any traditional statistical method, such as a linear regression. One big reason for that is that data doesn't always produce results that are in a straight line. The data may take many different shapes and curves, and that's where deep learning excels. The authors want even bigger numbers of patients so the model can perform better. Here is a fantastic application called Google TensorFlow Playground. Here I can set the number of input nodes, the number of deep layers. CNNs have many deep layers. We can then play with the size of the batch and the numbers of epochs. You'll learn what all that means in the later courses. But here you get to actually play with them and see what they do. Now let's press the button and see what happens. The data is not a straight line at all, but a circle, something impossible to attain with linear regression. So have fun with this free tool, seeing how you can increase the accuracy by changing parameters such as batch size and numbers of epochs. In the real world, this is exactly what you will begin doing once you finish a model. A lot of this is trial and error, trying to see what yields the very best results. Often, you will compare your work to standard statistical models or even to machine learning techniques like a support vector machine. By tuning your model, you'll be able to get the best possible results. Also important to say that in your job, You may not be creating these models, though it's very important to understand how they are constructed and why. What will you do? The biggest job is data wrangling, that is, preparing materials for neural networks. As an example, for COVID in our home state, test results were first written on a piece of paper for the state, then transferred to the CDC where they wanted another piece of paper, and finally into a computer. So imagine how many errors were made along the way. As a data wrangler, your job will be to throw out all the bad data and to accommodate for missing data, often by inserting an average of sorts that we'll learn about. The other part of your job will be tuning a pre-existing model that your hospital or company has built for you. You'll play with many different kinds of parameters to get the best possible results. Then you want to compare it to a range of machine learning and standard statistical methods to demonstrate that you are getting great results. Much more in the sections on that course. Okay, that's it. Phew! Tons of amazing applications. In the next lessons, we'll learn how to make your own deep learning and machine learning applications. We've had all kinds of terminology thrown at us here, but believe me, it's much simpler than you think. We'll reference some of these great examples here. Hopefully you have some ideas of applications that you may want to apply to your current or future career and are excited to get started in deep learning and machine learning in the world of medicine and healthcare. Thank you so much for watching. Dr. Bob Arnott here.